Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, trends, and information from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm Chris Pareja, I'm your host this evening, and I'm joined by my first guest, Debbie Bacigalupi, who is going to be speaking with us this evening about a recent trip to Rio, and not for vacation. Welcome to the show, Debbie.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. So, talk to me a little bit about what you were doing in Rio.
Well, I had to see for myself if there is truly this thing called United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development. So we, as we've been in the Bay Area fighting for our freedoms and fighting against these agendas, the One Bay Area Plan, the Grand Boulevard Initiative, transit villages, all seem to have ties to what we believe is a private property takeover. And when we follow the groups back, we always come back to this thing called Agenda 21. And I had heard that people who talk about Agenda 21, which is the agenda for the 21st century, are conspiracy theorists.
I've heard a lot of that as well. People think that if you know what Agenda 21 is, that you may be a flat earther or wear tinfoil hats or just generally scared and very conspiratorial. So is that what you found when you went to Rio? Is it all make-believe?
It's not make-believe. Unfortunately, it is not. It's true. It's fact. And this is not a left-right political issue. This is an American freedom issue.
Okay.
And it is for fact. The Rio Earth Summit, it was the 20th anniversary. It was called Rio Plus 20. There were only a certain few ways that you can get into the conference. You had to have your United Nations badge, but before you could get your United Nations badge, with your photo ID, you had to be accepted, and you had to go as either a non-government organization, a delegate from a country, or you had to be a political figure to make it there.
And so you're also running for office, which we won't go into detail about. And was that your passport to get over there?
No, well, no. I went as an NGO, a non-government organization, through a group, CFACT, out of Washington, D.C., and that was the only way I could get in. It took months for people to get accepted.
Okay.
The security was very tight, military everywhere, helicopters, surveillance. It was extreme.
So it was a closed-door meeting of people from around the world to discuss stuff that doesn't exist, Agenda 21 types of initiatives.
Well, it was all about sustainable development, right. And according to the Earth Summit and the 20th anniversary, it was supposed to be about saving a dying Earth, right? And they had so it was supposedly 55,000 people. I don't know that it was quite 55,000 people there. It was supposed to be about that the Earth is global warming and we need to save the Earth. I'm a corporate event planner as well. And there were buses. I've never seen so many buses. I have never seen so many people concentrated in one area. The closest hotel, remember this is about the environment, the closest hotel was about an hour bus ride away. Then when you get there, there's subflooring, there were walls brought in, there was specialty lighting, thousands and thousands and thousands of documents, signs, air conditioning, heaters, brought in restrooms, plants, decor, computers, light, I already said lighting, curtains, everything subflooring with turf on it. As a corporate event planner, who knows green events? This was not green.
Well, and also, when you put 55,000 NGOs and politicians in the same room, the carbon output and the greenhouse gases emitted from those people, even before all of the deviant things that they do when the meetings are not in session, is astronomical as it is.
Yes, agreed.
So what did you find from a content level? You told us a little bit about the environment and that it was obviously a no-cost spared kind of event.
Right.
What did you find content-wise?
They had what they called these side events or breakout meetings. First of all, there's a large room where non-delegates, so that would be you and me coming in as a non-government organization, could get food. So there was fast food, there were like grocery stores, chairs everywhere, coffee. You could get coffee from coffee kiosks everywhere, and then a huge, huge screen. And now on this huge screen was the live meeting going on with all the delegates around the world. And every other word was sustainable development. Mm-hmm. So when you weren't in this big room eating lunch and throwing away your garbage in just a normal garbage can, then you might be in a side event. Some of the side events were, some of the ones that I went to were, one was about universal health care, and it was the World Health Organization, and how we need to, as a globe, move into universal health care, which Obamacare is one step towards universal health care.
Sure.
And I was just talking to some teenagers the other day as I've been campaigning, and we were talking about healthcare, and they brought up universal healthcare, and I said, "Where are you learning this?" From our instructors, from our teachers. Mm-hmm. Universal healthcare means global healthcare at a global level. So I went to one of those meetings with the World Health Organization, and under sustainable development, there's the 3 E's. There's social justice, social equity, economic justice, and environmental justice. You get the point. Mm-hmm. It's the 3 E's. And the only way sustainable development can be achieved is at a universal healthcare level. So that was one meeting, and it was extraordinary. Not in a good way. It was an extraordinary, as in mind-boggling, at the level in which the details for universal healthcare are being set up. Mm-hmm. Another meeting that we went to was about surveillance, and how we'll have something like 60 billion new surveillance cameras, surveillance devices set up around the world. You know, and someone might say, what really? Countries have planned 20 years for this conference. This conference got, you could look up Rio Plus 20 right now and see massive groups, special interest groups, governments, countries, individual corporations that link to Rio Plus 20. It's like this massive web, spider web of linkages. Extraordinary. Some of the other meetings were about women. We're in, right now in the United States, on this supposed war on women, right? I'm a woman. There's no war on women. But at the Sustainable Development Conference, too, it was all about women. And how do we get women, how do we make the world equal for the women? And how do we get jobs to more women? And I think that's great. But my concern is that at a very deep level, this is about population control. It's not about equal justice. It's not about the environment. I can tell you that for a fact because of all the waste that they had every night, the food, the garbage, everything. The other meetings were about children. Children got a lot of children's meetings, and how children should be educated about sustainable development. Everything they should do should be recycling. Mm-hmm. They should teach their parents before their parents have more children. They should make sure their parents know how to parent. These were the kind of conversations that were going on.
Well, children are not sustainable, nor is agriculture, nor is having people that live outside of cities.
Right.
Those things. I've read some of the biodiversity study information and Agenda 21 information, and it's very specific about what needs to happen and how we need to reduce the world population, et cetera, control who reproduces and who doesn't.
Correct.
But here in the Bay Area, we're told that, things like ICLEI, which is an organization that falls out of this kind of a scenario, is it doesn't really exist. What happened when you talked to people about ICLEI and sustainable development when you were at Rio?
Sure. So ICLEI is the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives. ICLEI is in most of our local governments, especially here in the Bay Area. I think the only city that doesn't have a partnership with ICLEI is Belmont, California. ICLEI was supposed to be a consultation group to count greenhouse gases. If you look at their tax forms, it's called a Form 990, you could see that the ICLEI, International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives, is to forward Local Agenda 21. If you go back to their 2000, which this is public information, you could go back to their 2000-2001 forms, and it says LA 21. Well, that's Local Agenda 21. The United Nations did a blueprint called Agenda 21, and it's a book about this thick. I don't have it with me today, but ICLEI wrote the 28th chapter on local authorities. So ICLEI is also known as local authorities. When I interviewed ICLEI, We did two different interviews with ICLEI. One was with the international president. His name is David Cadman. And the other was with the United States president, who's Michael Schmitz. Michael Schmitz is out of Oakland. Both David and Michael, both Mr. Cadman and Mr. Schmitz, said that California is the pilot program for walkable, bikeable public transportation communities. The ultimate goal is to get us out of our cars and in biking, walking, and taking public transportation. We will be coming out with a video that will have these interviews. When I asked different delegations, like from Turkey, for example, who ICLEI was, do people in Turkey know who ICLEI is? They said yes. I said, people in the United States have no idea what Agenda 21 is or what ICLEI is. Right. They laugh. So for them, they've been having this conversation about ICLEI and Agenda 21 for 20 years now. Right. So for them, it's no big deal. They think, when I said, our government isn't telling us about these things, why? They were amazed.
Right.
Amazed.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot more to share, and you said you have a project coming up. Can you just give us the name of the project so people can keep an eye out on it?
Well, it is going to be a documentary called From Siskiyou to Rio. That's the name that we're coming up with right now. It's with Americans for Prosperity. It's in the works, but they could always go to my website. I do talk about Agenda 21.
Okay.
On my website, but there's some other great websites, freedomadvocates.org. You can find tons of information, or Democrats Against UN Agenda 21. Okay. That's Democrats Against UN Agenda 21. That's a friend of mine, right, whose website that is. And Rosa Corey speaks. She's a Democrat speaking out against Agenda 21 throughout the United States.
Okay. Well, thank you, Debbie, for sharing.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to chatting with you again about the topic of Agenda 21 and other things sometime soon.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And at this point, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back with our next guest, Bob Zeidman. Welcome back to The Right Side. Again, I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and now I'm joined with Bob Zeidman, the author of the new book, Good Intentions. Welcome, Bob.
Hi, Chris. Thanks a lot for having me.
So, the book Good Intentions, title sounds innocuous enough. What's it about?
Well, it's about the good intentions, a place that I see that unfortunately the United States might be going with a lot of the policies that are being enacted, especially under this administration. And I decided that I would take a look and see what would happen if these policies of entitlement, things like government regulation, class warfare, were taken to an extreme. And so I decided to write the book Good Intentions about that.
Okay. And so what it sounds like you're saying is your premise is that the things that are being enacted, in some people's minds, they might actually be doing them for the quote-unquote right reasons, to watch over people, but that there are sometimes unintended consequences of those particular pieces of legislation and action.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, I sometimes have fellow conservatives come to me and talk to me about how they believe that the liberals have a reason for doing what they're doing to destroy America, destroy our values. And I actually am not one of those people who believe that. I believe that most people have good intentions, but I think that people, the liberals, the far left in particular, their good intentions have very good short-term consequences, giving a person a boost who needs it. But in reality, because of these programs they're putting in place, because of regulating businesses, because of things that immediately look like they're doing good things, they have very bad long-term consequences.
Right. If we look at, for example, wherever these liberal types of policies have taken over, we end up with higher crime rates, lower education outcomes. We have a number of other side effects because people become dependent. But what happened that was the impetus, or what motivated you to write the book?
Well, I would say that it was my reading of Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. So most of my friends in high school had read the book in high school, and they'd recommended it to me. But in high school, I had no interest in politics. And reading, I forget, it's like 1,400 pages. It's a
lot of
big
them.
book, yeah. I looked at that and I said, no, I think I'll read a comic book instead. But over the years, I got more politically active. As I grew up, it became more important. And then in 2008, when Barack Obama was elected, I thought, well, now I should read Atlas Shrugged because I hear it's relevant. And really what happened is the message in Atlas Shrugged what was very relevant about government regulation, about anti-competition.
Cronyism,
exactly. I mean, you saw it and you said, wow, this is so prescient that this is exactly what's happening. But the thing that I didn't like about it, and I'm going to upset some Ayn Rand fans, but I thought as far as a novel, it didn't work that well. That the characters were too easy to identify.
Yes.
When somebody walks in the room, if it's a really good-looking guy who's physically fit and dressed well, or a woman, there's one woman basically, very good-looking, dressed well, that's the good guys.
Right.
And the fat cats, the politicians, the guys who were sloppy and overweight, and well, they were the bad guys and they talked poorly.
Right.
And everybody made these long speeches. They were great speeches, but after you get to the fifth, the sixth one that goes on for pages, it was tough for me. So I thought, what if I could take the concepts and put them into a book that's more satirical, more fun?
Smaller,
exactly, and easier read. Yeah. And so, I did that. I hope I did that. And, what I'm really hoping for is that, conservatives, libertarians, objectivists, all read this book and say, yeah, I agree with the message here. But more importantly, the people who are undecided, maybe even the people leaning left, will read this book and perhaps have a really fun time reading it. And then at the end, they'll say, hey, wait a minute. Some of these are really important things, but they won't realize that until they've gotten through to the end.
Okay. Without obviously giving away too much of the plot, are there particular things that you're proud of that kind of made their way into the book?
There's so much in there.
Or particular characters that you just identify with personally. Obviously, you will identify with all of them, having them come out of your head. But,
right.
I mean, are there particular attributes that...
Well, first let me tell you that there are a lot of hidden things in the book. And interestingly enough, I had a reviewer who wrote about the book, and he said, obviously, this character is so-and-so, and this character is so-and-so, and he got it completely wrong. But what was interesting is that he had found something in there to believe in, to match up in the book, and I found that interesting. But I had certain people in mind. But let me tell you the premise of the book, the initial premise. Basically, in the future, we've learned, starting in the early 21st century, we learned that it takes no skills to be president, and so the president is appointed by a random lottery. But as it turns out, there's a secret society that's actually appointing presidents because they need a president who has the right racial, religious, ethnic, socioeconomic background to truly represent America.
And it's diversity.
Right, exactly. They have a diversity council. It's a pretty funny scene, I think, when they're trying to figure out what diversity means in the future. And so they appoint this man to be president, and he really doesn't want to be president. And so the novel is his journey to try to escape this responsibility. And in the meantime, he's learning about what America's about, all these underground societies, some of which are good, some of which are bad, but kind of instilling in him American values of competition, of true equality, not fake equality.
Okay.
And in answer to your question, I'll just say there is one thing that I find interesting. There was in every novel, you want to have an emotional connection.
Sure. And
I had the novel actually written where the main character has an epiphany at some point. I don't think that's surprising.
No.
But, and I thought this makes sense. I've laid out the groundwork. I've put him in these situations. People have given talks to him, and he turns around. But I thought there's no emotional quality to it. And so my wife and I were in the car, actually, on a long drive, and I said, I need to fix this somehow, so I'm going to bounce some ideas off you. And she gave me this idea. I won't tell you what it was, but the idea was actually to create a character who represented a real person in my life. And in the first 5 minutes of the ride, she said that to me, and I said, wow, that fixes the whole story. I had to go insert new chapters throughout the book so that in addition to his intellectual journey, he had this emotional journey. But it's just kind of interesting how those things happen. But it's a character, I don't want to give too much away, but it's a character that had a very personal relationship to the main character in the book based on someone who had a very close relationship to me.
Okay, so it's not just about political characters, it is about real people and kind of the journeys that they may go on at the same time.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope people can see. I read a lot of novels and see movies, and it bothers me when something comes out of thin air or people do things that don't make sense.
Right.
And I really tried hard. The biggest block I had writing this was when I'd come up to a situation, I said, it'd be really funny or really important if the character does this, but if the reader doesn't believe it, that the character could do it, it's not going to work. And I'd sit there and I'd think, how is it going to be believable? And sometimes I'd have to go back and change previous chapters in the book to lead up to the chapter that I'm trying to get that event to occur in.
Okay. Excellent. And just as someone who's tried to write a book in the past, I know how painful it can be. I've got one that hasn't been touched for like 4 or 5 years. How long did it take you to write? Obviously, it's been since Obama's election.
Well, it took a year. It took exactly a year of nights and weekends. I give advice. I shouldn't say I give advice. Sometimes I give advice to writers who don't want my advice, but
right.
I've met a lot of writers and people who have attempted to write a novel. And a lot of them start out with an idea and they just start writing. And a few people like Stephen King can do that, but it's rare.
Right.
What I do, and this is what I recommend anyone, is outline, I had a complete outline of my book. And then every day that I go attack my book, I'm just trying to write one chapter, and I know exactly how it begins and how it ends. And that makes it a much easier task. But then, of course, at some point, you have to be able to go back and say, those last few chapters, I have to throw them away. But at least you had them and you had a goal.
Right.
So you've got to be, in my opinion, at least for me, I've got to be able to write an outline of the whole book chapter by chapter, write one chapter at a time, but not be in love with it so much that I can't say, I need to throw these chapters out and write them again.
The emotional attachments with the reader can't be with the author, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us this evening about Good Intentions, and we'll look forward to staying in touch and seeing how it goes from here.
Great,
thank you. And at this point, we have a quick word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
Well, I say I'm a constitutional law attorney. They say, oh really, what kind of constitutional law attorney? I say, well, I'm the true kind. The kind that believe that the Constitution is what the Constitution says and what it was intended to say. Anything beyond that is tyranny and should not be allowed.
So let's come to this, my friends. You ready for the second American Revolution against a ruling class that simply lectures but does not listen or defend the American people? It is government versus the people. Am I right? Yeah. Look at the Electoral College example, right? A leftist popular challenge to states' rights. You think the founders weren't brilliant people? Did they not know what they were doing by carefully calibrating to get the small states and the big states to come together? Why does Wyoming get 2 senators in California? Actually, I'd rather have Wyoming's 2 senators.
And that was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. We appreciate the support that they provide to make this show possible. And to tell you a little bit more about them, you can visit their website at theconservativeforum.com. They typically meet the first Tuesday of each month, and at the Portuguese IFES Hall here in Mountain View. The address is 432 Steerlin Road. And the speakers that they bring to the forum are one of the draws that sometimes put 300 to 500 conservatives, yes, here in Silicon Valley, all in the same room at the same time. September speaker is John Fund, who we had the pleasure of interviewing recently. October speaker will be Jesse Lee Peterson. And in November, John Caviani will be joining us. He's a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, and he'll be joining us for our election night viewing party of the results coming in for potentially our new or a re-election of our current presidential candidate. And then in December, we have our Christmas party with Armstrong and Getty, and that'll be a great way to end the year with cheer and festivities. But in closing, we've talked a little bit this evening earlier with Debbie, and she brought up the war on women. We talked with Bob a little bit about the nanny state and government being involved in a lot of different areas and the different special groups that are involved in those things. And when I think of conventions and presidential elections and war on women, nothing comes to mind more quickly than the recent display at the Republican National Convention by Code Pink, where several women decided to dress up as 5'4" to 6 foot tall vaginas in order to protest the imagined war, or in their estimation, the real war on women. Just wanted to make the point that conservatives are not all about a war on women. Conservatives didn't, for example, stand up and say that they were against stopping people from doing gender-selective abortions, as an example. But we also don't choose to look at women as 5'4" to 6 foot tall vaginas either. We tend to look at them as the whole woman. And we're perfectly willing to have a discussion, an adult conversation about a very important topic to many people around the country. But just so you know, instead of just talking to people as genitals or talking to people's genitals, we'd prefer to talk to your minds. So keep that in mind, and if you want us to treat you with respect, please dress yourself appropriately and talk to us in a manner that is more intellectual as opposed to just generally oriented. On that note, we'd like to thank you for attending or viewing The Right Side this evening. Again, I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and we look forward to visiting with you again in the near future. Thanks a lot.